Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. So we will continue with our study of the Buddha and His Dhamma. And as we have seen the last in the last class, the part 1 of the part 5 of the Buddha and His Dhamma, and in the part 1 we have looked at length as to what constitute the Sangha, and we have seen the various organization of the Sangha and how the bhikshus are admitted in the Sangha, and various vows taken by the bhikshu, and various offenses that they commit, and how to remedify their bad conduct. So we have seen all that, and today we are entering into the discussion of the part 2. In the part 2 of the Buddha of the book 5 of the Buddha and His Dhamma, and the title of part 2 is the Bhikkhu, the Buddha's conception of him. So as we know that Baba Ambedkar didn't want to leave any ambiguity when he talked about the Buddha's Dhamma. And in this particular part 2, the Buddha has talked about how we can become an ideal person. What is an ideal person? What is an ideal society? And what ideal we should strive for. And this part 2, the Bhikkhu, the Buddha's conception of him, is divided into 4 subparts. The subpart 1 is titled as Buddha's conception of what a bhikkhu should be. That's it, part 1. And subpart 2 is the bhikshu or bhikkhu and the ascetic. What is the difference between the bhikshu or bhikkhu or ascetic? That's the part 2. What is the difference between the bhikkhu and the Brahmin? So this is the part 3, subpart 3. And then ultimately, what is the difference between the bhikkhu and the upasaka? So we will be looking at this 4 subpart of the part 2, which is titled as the Bhikkhu, Buddha's conception of him, in the book 5 of the Buddha and His Dhamma. So we know that whenever Baba Ambedkar has talked about Buddha's teachings or about Buddhism, he wanted to leave no ambiguity. He wanted to clarify everything. So the Buddha and His Dhamma covers all the grounds that are necessary for us to understand the Buddha's Dhamma very clearly in terms of the Buddha, Dhamma and Sangha. And part 5 is exclusively devoted to the third jewel, which is called the Sangha jewel. So Buddha, Dhamma, we have studied at length in the previous 4 books of the Buddha and His Dhamma. And this book 5 exclusively talks about Sangha. So let's look at it. How does the Buddha, conceptualized the Bhikkhu? So the Buddha has himself told the bhikkhus what he expected of them as bhikkhus. This is what he has said. So this is what he has said about the bhikkhu. He who wishes to put on the yellow dress without having cleansed himself from sin, who disregards also temperance and truth, is unworthy of the yellow dress. This is from the Dhammapad. So those who, just by wearing the yellow robe, one doesn't become a bhikkhu. Only when a person cleanses themselves of the sins and who is, who disregards, disregards temperance and truth, is not qualified for the yellow robe. You see, so the yellow robes or the kasaya vastra, which is worn by the bhikshus, by just changing the cloth, one doesn't become a bhikshu. One doesn't become a bhikkhu by wearing the chivar or by wearing the yellow robe. One becomes a bhikkhu only when they clean themselves of sin. Sabba papasa karanam, not doing any sin. Only then they become, they are qualified to wear the yellow robe. That's what Baba Sahib says. And the implication of all this discussion is with our personal lives as to how do we live in a society, in a community, which has an ideal to seek forward. Isn't it? And Baba Ambedkar is going to come to that discussion as to why he conceptualized a bhikkhu. What was the necessity to conceptualize a bhikkhu? So, the outward wearing of the clothes doesn't decide, or doesn't make you qualified to be a bhikkhu. Only when we try to clean ourselves of the sin, when we try to be well grounded in all the virtues and endowed also with temperance and truth, he is indeed worthy of the yellow robe. And I think this is a very pithy sort of wording that Baba Ambedkar has put up here in terms of how the Buddha has conceptualized the bhikkhu. And the fourth verse is very, very beautiful. A man is not a mendicant. Man is not a bhikkhu simply because he asks others for alms. He who adopts the whole law is a bhikkhu, not he who only begs. You see, the bhikshus were asked to go door to door for their food. And one of the reasons the Buddha instituted this system of begging was to, keep the bhikshus in contact with what's happening in the society. So they were supposed to go from door to door. They were not supposed to beg from any single house. They were supposed to go at least 7 houses, 7 doors to get their food. So what the Buddha says that, simply by begging food or alms from the others is not going to make you a bhikkhu. Only when you adopt the whole law, the total Dhamma, the Sadhamma, then only one is a bhikkhu. Now, whenever I'm talking about the bhikkhu, it also implies that we are talking about our own self. This ideal has to be emulated. This ideal has to be understood by all the Buddhists as to why the Buddha conceptualized the ideal of a bhikkhu. So, in the verse number 4, a man is not a mendicant or a bhikkhu simply because he asks others for the alms. He who adopts the whole law is a bhikkhu. So unless we adopt the whole teachings of the Buddha, the whole Dhamma and Sadhamma, we are not qualified to be called a bhikkhu. One who is above evil, one who is chaste, who with care passes through the world, he indeed is called a bhikkhu. This word, one who passes with care through the world. Because you see, whether we are bhikkhu or not a bhikkhu, we have to pass through the world. We are in the company of the people all the time. We are dealing with the world. So how does a bhikkhu deal with the world? With care, with kindness, with compassion. One passes through the world. So this is not something that, we are talking about in terms of abstract ideal. We are talking about a day-to-day living person, dealing with the society. So how does a bhikkhu deal with the world? With care. Not only by discipline and vows, not only by much learning, not by entering into a trance, not sleeping alone, do I earn the happiness of release which no worldlings can know. O bhikkhus, he who has obtained the extinction of desires has obtained confidence. All the time, as we have seen in the previous classes, that our mind is running after the pleasures that are created by our senses. We are running after the sensory consciousness. We are running after the senses, our sensory pleasures, as the Buddha has taught. And once we tried, we begin to deal with sensory pleasure with a kind of detachment, then the pleasure that we get is incomparable with any pleasure in the world. That's what the Buddha says, that there is a higher pleasure than the sensory pleasure, the pleasure of being good, the pleasure of doing good, the pleasure of sharing good with the others surpasses all the pleasures in the world. So the Buddha says that, you see, not only by discipline and vows, not only by much learning, it doesn't matter whether you have read many books, not by entering into a trance. Sometimes we think that if we enter into the dhyanic states or some kind of a trance, meditative states, we might, gain the release and we will earn happiness. But the Buddha says that, O bhikkhu, he who has obtained the extinction of desires has obtained confidence. And the 7th is very important. The 7th pertains to all of us. And in the society, it pertains to a lot of, what goes on in the society. So the verse number 7 goes like this: the bhikkhu who controls his mouth, isn't it? It is said that when we are born with a sword in our mouth, isn't it? That's our tongue. And with our tongue, we slay a lot of people. So the verse number 7 says the bhikkhu who controls his mouth, who speaks wisely and calmly. You see, as I often say, that every single word in the Buddha and His Dhamma matters. Baba Ambedkar has taken a lot of care to frame the Buddha and His Dhamma the way it is framed, the way it is written, because every single word counts. So a bhikkhu is someone who controls his mouth, who speaks wisely and calmly. So just speaking wisely is not enough. We need to speak calmly. Who teaches the meaning of the law, his word is sweet. You see, the Buddha didn't say that he teaches the law. The bhikshu has to teach the meaning of the law, which means that he has to go beyond the words, isn't it? He has to teach the truth. So it is not just verbosity that the bhikshu should do. He should not just speak the words, but he should explain the meaning behind the teachings of the Buddha. And his word is sweet. The word of a bhikkhu or the word of a Buddhist, for example, should be sweet. It should produce a calming effect on other people. So the ideal that the Buddha has conceived in terms of a bhikkhu applies to all of us, isn't it? As previous in the previous verses, the Buddha says that just by wearing the robe, you doesn't become bhikkhu. Only when you start cleaning your heart, when you start cleaning your mind, you become a bhikkhu. You are qualified to wear a yellow robe. And this verse number 7, I find it very fascinating. Who teaches the meaning of the law, his word is sweet. And the 8th, you see, gradually it has this what is called the reverberating effect. Now you see how it progresses gradually too. He who dwells in the law, a bhikkhu dwells in the law, the Dhamma, delights in the law. The bhikkhu, whenever he or she talks about or listen about or practices the Dhamma, there is a delight. He delights in the law, meditates on the law, recollects the law. That bhikkhu will never fall away from the true law. You see this progression in the verse number 8. He who dwells in the law, he lives in the Dhamma, delights in the Dhamma, meditates on the Dhamma, recollects the Dhamma. All the time he is or she is recollecting the Dhamma. That bhikkhu will never fall away from the true law, from the Sadhamma. That person will never fall away. One who is constantly thinking about the Dhamma, dwelling in the Dhamma, delighting in the Dhamma, meditating on the Dhamma, recollecting the Dhamma, that bhikkhu will never fall away from the true law. It's not just applicable to the bhikshus. The ideal can be sought by anybody, isn't it? We can all, inhibit, or, we all inhabit this kind of the qualities that the Buddha has put forward for the bhikkhu. Let him not despise what he has received. So sometimes what we have received, we feel, despicable, nor ever envy others. A bhikkhu is not supposed to envy others. A mendicant who envies others does not obtain peace of mind. You see, if our mind is full of envy all the time, if we are all the time competing with somebody, what does it mean? We will never obtain the peace of mind. Every time we are comparing ourselves with others. Every time we are trying to, see that we are better than others. Or even if we are not, we are claiming that we are better than others. But this is not to be done by a bhikkhu. This is not to be done by the follower of the Buddha. A mendicant who envies others does not obtain peace of mind. A bhikkhu who, though he receives little, does not despise what he has received. Even the gods will praise him if his life is pure and if he is not slothful. You see, this is just a word metaphor of saying that everybody will please the one whose life is pure and he is not slothful, he is not lazy. He who never identifies himself with name and form and does not grieve over what is no more, he indeed is called a bhikkhu. The verse number 11 is very profound. Very, very profound. Name and form means the entire world is full of name and form. Naming and form. You see, we are always conceptualizing something, we are always labeling something, and we are caught up in the wave of name and form. which is called in Buddhism Nama-rupa. And Buddha says that attachment to the Nama-rupa leads to suffering. Upadana Khanda, they are called the Khanda. Five Khanda in a categorization. The two, they are called Nama-rupa. So whenever there is an attachment to the Nama-rupa, the suffering will follow. The mind of the bhikshu should be free. He should not be attached to anything. He should not be attached to any naming, any doctrine, anything. He should not be attached to any form. And when our minds are detached from the names and forms, then our minds are free to act. And therefore, verse number 11 is very profound in a sense. He who never identifies himself with name and form and does not grieve over what is no more. So what is gone is gone. We are giving all the time for what we have done. What is gone. We are always, brooding over what has gone wrong in the past. And does not grieve over what is no more. He indeed is called a bhikkhu. The bhikkhu who behaves with kindness, who is happy with the doctrine of the Buddha, will reach Nibbana, happiness arising from the cessation of natural inclination, instincts. We have some instincts, if we look at our brains, we have all this baggage of the evolution, and sometimes our brains act in a very crazy ways. And the Buddha says that, we have to find a way to seize our instinctual behavior. We should not always be acting on our instincts. So the verse number 12, the bhikkhu who behaves with kindness, who is happy with the doctrine of the Buddha. There is a happiness when we perceive, when we study, when we practice the Buddha's Dhamma, will reach Nibbana. Happiness arising from the cessation of natural inclinations. O bhikkhu, and this is one of my favorite verses from the Buddha and His Dhamma. O bhikkhu, empty this boat. If emptied, it will go quickly. Having cut off passion and hatred, thou will go to Nibbana. You see this three lines. And the way the Buddha has said, oh bhikkhus, empty this boat, our body, but the boat of body and mind is so full of, so loaded. And in the Bharat Sutta, Buddha says that, we are carrying so much of a weight, the weight of ideas, the weight of, all attachments. We are carrying so much of weight. And because of that weight, our boat is not moving fast. And therefore, the Buddha says, oh bhikkhu, empty this boat. If emptied, it will go quickly. So the more your mind is empty of this Nama-rupa, then your mind will go fast towards the Nibbana. Having cut off passion and hatred, thou will go to Nibbana. Isn't it? This beautiful verse, oh bhikkhu, empty this boat. If emptied, it will go quickly. Having cut off passion and hatred, thou will go to Nibbana. This is how beautifully worded by the Buddha. Verse number 14, cut off the five fetters. We have seen in the previous classes what are the five fetters. Cut off the five fetters, leave the five, rise above the five. A bhikkhu who has escaped from the five fetters, he is called Ogatinna, saved from the flood. This simile of a flood is there, in the Buddhist text, as we can see all the time. And the Buddha says that we need to go against the stream, Sota, Patti Sotagami. And indeed, the Buddha goes against the stream. We are always following the fashions of the world, the passions of the world. We are not capable to flow against the stream. In other words, we are not, Ogatinna. And Shrotapanna, we know Shrotapanna, who has entered into stream. Now they are going to straight away go to Nibbana because their boats are empty. Nothing can stop them from attaining the Nibbana because their minds are empty of the names and forms. You see, the beauty of Baba Sahib's Buddha and His Dhamma is, he has clarified a lot of things so simply, so beautifully, that when we begin to grapple with the Buddha and His Dhamma, we begin to see that all these concepts like Nibbana, passion, and this and that, they become making sense to us. They start speaking to us directly. Isn't it? Now you see this verse number 14, cut off the five, leave the five, rise above the five. A bhikkhu who has escaped from the five fetters, he is Ogatinna. It's a Pali word, Ogatinna. saved from the flood. They can never be flooded. They can never be helpless. You see, whenever we are caught up in a flood, what happens? We feel helpless. We cannot do anything. The flood of thoughts, the flood of emotions, it's not in our control. But as the Buddha teaches here, that we have to become Ogatinna. We have to save ourselves from the flood. And the verse number 15, again beautiful. Meditate, O Bhikkhu, and be not heedless. Do not direct thy thought to what gives pleasure. Do not direct your thoughts to the sense doors. Do not direct your thoughts to the sensory consciousness. Isn't it? Because the pleasure that comes to the senses is very temporarily. It cannot last. But the pleasure that comes by practicing the Buddha Dhamma, is not temporary. So meditate, O Bhikkhu, and be not heedless. Do not direct thy thought to what gives pleasure. Without knowledge, there is no meditation. This is a very famous verse from the Dhammapad. Without knowledge, there is no meditation. Without meditation, there is no knowledge. He who has knowledge and meditation is near unto Nibbana. So clear, so beautifully structured, so nicely worded here. And so nicely presented by Baba Ambedkar. Without knowledge, there is no meditation. Without meditation, there is no knowledge. So the knowledge and meditation go hand in hand. You cannot separate knowledge from the meditation and meditation from the knowledge. He who has knowledge and meditation is near unto Nibbana. A bhikkhu who has entered his empty house and whose mind is tranquil. See, the way the teachings are gradually taught and presented here by Baba Ambedkar is so astonishing. You see, a bhikkhu who has entered his empty house and whose mind is tranquil. Only when you enter into the empty house, free from the nama and rupa, free from the conceptualization and the proliferation of the ideas, which sometimes can mislead us. So here, a bhikkhu who has entered his empty house. And somewhere I read, Baba Ambedkar said that what is Buddhist meditation is to empty our mind. Isn't he says that whenever you go to any temple or like that, you keep your chappals or your footwears out. Just like that, whenever you want to enter into meditative state, you keep all the conceptualization out. You empty your mind of all these baggages of thought, all the baggages of passion, emotion. You just empty your mind. So a bhikkhu who has entered his empty house and whose mind is tranquil feels a more than human delight when he sees the Dhamma clearly. See how beautifully worded here. The wordings. A bhikkhu who has entered his empty house and whose mind is tranquil feels a more than human delight when he sees the Dhamma clearly. That's when we see the Dhamma clearly. The Dhamma cannot be grasped with the name and form. It can be directly experienced at the truth of paticca samutpada, of rising and falling, of how the things arise and fall away, the truth of paticca samutpada. And how do we see the Dhamma clearly? Only when a bhikkhu who has entered his empty house. Empty house is a simile of something empty of any conceptualization, empty of any discursive thoughts, empty of flood-like emotions. Whenever our mind is empty like that, what happens? And whose mind is tranquil, feels a more than human delight. More than a human delight when he sees the Dhamma clearly. That's where we see the Dhamma clearly. And this is the beginning here for a wise bhikkhu. Watchfulness over the senses. A bhikkhu is supposed to watch, to be on guard. And the Buddha says when he talks about sati, and Baba Ambedkar also used this simile, that sati is like a doorkeeper, dorpal. So what does a dorpal does? A doorkeeper or watchman does? They watch the square, the crossroads, that who is coming from this direction, who is coming from that direction. Their duty is to watch. Just like that, sati has a duty to watch the mind, watch the five senses, isn't it? And therefore, watchfulness over the senses, contentness, restraints under the Dhamma, keep noble friends whose life is pure and who are not slothful. Very important. If we keep these things, in our mind, how does a bhikkhu becomes a wise person? Because he keeps these things in his mind. 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 How does a bhikkhu becomes a wise person? watchfulness over the sense. They guard their senses. Number one, they are content. They are not given to greediness. They are not given to accumulation. They are not given to, the life of what is called the attachment or possessions. Restraints under the Dhamma. They practice the Dhamma so thoroughly that they can restrain themselves, under the Dhamma. And finally, but very important, is to keep noble friends whose life is pure and who are not slothful. They are energetic. Keep the company of the energetic friends. Keep the company of the friends whose life is pure. Let him live on charity. Let him be perfect in his duties. Then in the fullness of delight, he will make an end of suffering. You see, this word is very important. Why we are, the Buddha is telling them to live on charity. Because without charity, none of us can survive. We think that, we survive because of our own efforts, because we survive. No, because we survive because of the charity of others. Charity of the parents, charity of the teachers, charity of our siblings, charity of our friends, charity of so many people. Our lives, in a way, are not independent lives. We are continuously depending on other people. All the time we are depending on other people. And the bhikshu is no exception. He has to or she has to depend on other people. Let him be perfect in his duties. The duties that are bestowed upon them, they have to do it perfectly. Then in the fullness of delight, he will make an end of suffering. Verse number 20, again very beautifully put. Rouse thyself by thyself. Help yourself to rise yourself, to raise yourself, bootstrap yourself. Nobody is going to come to raise us. Rouse thyself by thyself. Examine thyself by thyself. You see? Thus self-protected and attentive will thou live happily, O Bhikkhu. What the Baba Sahib Ambedkar is putting here is rouse thyself by thyself. Only we can help ourselves. Only we can examine ourselves. There is nobody who is going to examine our minds for us. We have to, in other words, help us to raise ourselves, examine ourselves by examine. And if we do this, we are self-protected. And when we are self-protected and attentive, we will have the happiness. For self is the Lord of self. Atta hi attano natho. Self is the Lord of self. Self is the refuge of self. Only we take refuge in ourselves. Atta dipa bhava. Therefore, curb thyself as the merchant curbs a noble horse. You see, this is so beautifully said by the Lord. What is it? Rouse thyself by thyself. Nobody, no external agency is going to help us to rise, make a progress. Self is the refuge of self. Ultimately, we are our own refuge. Thus, self, and that's how we protect ourselves. And attentive will thou live happily, O Bhikkhu. For self is the Lord of self. Self is the refuge of self. Therefore, curb thyself as the merchant curbs a noble horse. Verse number 22 goes like this. A bhikkhu, mendicant, who delights in earnestness, who looks with fear on thoughtlessness, moves about like fire, burning all his fetters, small or large. All the fetters are to be burnt. Nothing is to be spared. A bhikkhu who delights in reflection. We have to develop this quality of reflecting back again and again. Who looks with fear on thoughtlessness, cannot fall away from his perfect state. He is close upon Nibbana. The disciple of Gautama Buddha are always well awake, and their thoughts day and nights are always set on Buddha. Very important that the thoughts of the bhikkhu should be always dwell on the Buddha. Buddhanusmriti, remembering the Buddha, recollecting the Buddha, the life of the Buddha, the thoughts of the Buddha, the Dhamma of the Buddha, the being of the Buddha, the teachings of the Buddha. The disciple of Gautama are always well awake, and their thoughts day and night are always set on the church, means the Sangha, the Buddhist Sangha. The disciple of Gautama Buddha are always well awake, and their thoughts day and night are always set on the Dhamma. Tiratna, our thoughts should always be dwelling on the Tisarana. The disciple of Gautama are always well awake and their thoughts day and night are always set on their body. Means they are cultivating the mindfulness of their body. And the Buddhist reflective practices begins with the mindfulness of the body. The disciple of Gautama Buddha are always well awake and their minds day and night always delight in compassion, karuna. The disciple of Gautama are always well awake and their minds day and night always delight in meditation. Means, making the mind completely focused. It is hard to leave the world to become a bhikkhu. It is hard to enjoy the world. Hard is the monastery. Painful are the houses. Painful it is to dwell with equals, to share everything in common, and the itinerant mendicant is beset with pain. So you don't think that the life of a bhikkhu is easy. The life of a person who has gone, who has become homeless, their lives are not easy. It's hard to leave the world. It's not easy to leave the world because the world is full of delightful pleasures. It's not easy to leave the world. It is hard, I think, not to enjoy the world. Hard is the monastery. Even the life of the monastery is not something that will be an easy life. It's a difficult life in the monastery. Painful are the houses. Even the houses, to dwell in the house is painful. Painful it is to dwell with equals. To live with others is not easy. If it is not driven by a certain purpose, living with others is also very difficult. To share everything in common, and the itinerant mendicant is beset with pain. A man full of faith, if endowed with virtue and glory, is respected, whatever place he may choose. So ultimately we have to have the deep faith in the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, and in the practices that the Buddha taught, the mindfulness of body, the compassion, and meditation. If we have the faith in the Buddha, Dhamma, and the Sangha, wherever we are, whether you are in the monastery, whether we are in the houses, and we have virtue and glory. Very important word, glory. The Buddhist life should be a glorious life. It should be the life of a hero. It should be a life full of glory. Is respected whatever place he may choose. So actually, I thought of finishing all the subparts today, but I thought this one section is very important. And as we were discussing in our WhatsApp groups, I wanted to orient today's class to celebrate the 132nd birthday of Baba Saheb Ambedkar. That was yesterday, and we had a lot of festivity yesterday. But in the mood of festivity, we shouldn't forget the teachings of Baba Saheb Ambedkar in terms of the Buddha's conception of what a bhikshu should be. And as we have seen that when we have talked about the ideal of a bhikkhu, it is not something that is for others to practice, isn't it? Each of us can become a bhikkhu or bhikshuni. We can live the life like that. And the various ways, in the very first two verses, the Buddha clarified, and as presented by Baba Ambedkar, that by not just changing your external appearance, you become qualified as a bhikkhu. Only when you start working on your mind, when you start purifying your mind, when you start to practice temperance, when you are trying to practice the truth, then only you are qualified. We have already donned the yellow robe, and then as Baba Ambedkar has gone on explaining what is the life of a bhikkhu, it speaks with each of us. It speaks with all the followers of the Buddha and otherwise who won't want to be free of suffering, who won't want to experience the bliss of Nibbana, and who won't want to leave the world of suffering. And according to the traditional etymology, the meaning of the word bhikkhu is a sharer, one who shares with others. Bhag, bhikkhu means has to do with bhag, one who shares with others. So this is an ideal to become ogatinna, not to get caught up in the flood of life, not to get caught up in the flood of thoughts, not to get caught up in the whirlpool of the destructive emotions. In other words, to become ogatinna is very important. To become, free from all the problems is important. And I think this is what Baba Saheb Ambedkar has expected from all of us, and this is what Baba Saheb Ambedkar was. If we take all these characteristics that have been put up in this subsection 1 of the part 2 of the book 5 of the Buddha and His Dhamma, we can fit this description to a T to Baba Saheb Ambedkar. isn't it? All the things that are mentioned here are true about Baba Sahib Ambedkar. So whenever we are trying to pursue this ideal of Bhikkhu, we can keep in mind the images of the Buddha, the images of Baba Sahib, and all those great people that have gone in the history as somebody who were qualified to call themselves a Bhikkhu. So what I will do, I will stop here and open up the class for any discussion, because I think there is a lot to reflect on in the today's class. So kindly, we can begin to reflect on it in the class. So anybody has anything to say?
So, Dr. Baba Sahib says that Bhikkhu has to purify first himself and then remove his passions, extinction of the passions, and then he should teach Dhamma to others. He should delight in the Dhamma. He should speak likewise, calmly and wisely, after controlling his passions, extinguishing his passions.
True. True. See, what we have to do, we can create a kind of a list of the things that the way Baba Sahib Ambedkar has done it here, isn't it? As to what constitute a life of a Bhikkhu. Because as I said, that this ideal is not just for the Bhikshu. Whatever is enumerated here in this particular subpart is for all to practice, isn't it? It's
5 fetters, verse 14, cut off the 5 fetters.
Yeah.
5 fetters are greed, hatred, laziness, doubt, and indecision.
Yes. Thank you for reminding us, because we have studied them in our previous classes as well.
Yes.
And but you see, this is how beautifully Baba Sahib Ambedkar put: cut off the 5, leave the 5, rise above the 5. Isn't it? So you see, the language of the Buddha and His Dhamma is very encouraging. It's like Baba Sahib himself is asking us how we can practice the Buddha's Dhamma. Cut off the 5, leave the 5, rise above the 5.
And by meditation only we can remove these fetters, 5 fetters.
Yes.
And,
yes, but there are a lot of practices. It is not just a conclusive word like meditation, because here in the verse number 6, it is said, not by entering into a trance, not by sleeping alone. So sometimes the over emphasis on the meditative states and reaching in the trance is not recommended, isn't it? So the meditation, as we have seen in the verse number 16, without knowledge there is no meditation. Without meditation there is no knowledge. He who has knowledge and meditation is near unto Nibbana. So don't forget the ultimate purpose of Nibbana. Why do we practice meditation? For Nibbana, to empty your mind of Nama Rupa.
Yes, right view and right aim.
Yes.
One must have knowledge of everything, what is true and what is right.
Yes.
So knowledge is also must, and along with knowledge, meditation.
Yes.
Both are important.
Both are important. Very nicely said. So any of you would like to reflect on, comment on what we have just read, and how does that relate with our human lives, our lives?
Yes, sir, Rahul here. Sorry.
Yeah, continue, please.
Yes. So the verse number 8, he who dwells in the law, delights in the law, meditates on the law, recollects the law, that Bhikkhu will never fall away from the true law. So as you mentioned, means you replace the word law with the Dhamma, and that is very important thing I want to highlight here.
Yes.
That law is the Dhamma. Means whoever is Christian, whoever is a Hindu, or he is a Muslim, but law and Dhamma applies to all.
Yes.
And that this Dhamma is the law of life. So whatever karma he will commit, so he have to face the consequences as per the particular samupada. So means Buddha's Dhamma means why Baba Sahib Ambedkar said it is different from religion or dharma. So I think that's something point out here, that
Yeah.
no one can escape from the Dhamma, and who knows the Dhamma, he will take benefits of it. Otherwise, if he don't know the law, he can commit some kinds, and he have to face the consequences of that one.
Very true.
If he do good, he have to it will yield good. If he will do bad, it will yield bad. But if he knows what are the consequences of that bad, then he can avoid that one if he reads the Dhamma. He can be Muslim, he can be Christian, so no one can have escape from the Dhamma.
Yes.
So that this translation is very good actually.
Yeah,
Yep.
True.
Yes. Karma, cause and effect theory and law of karma, one must understand and follow it.
Good. Rahul bhai, very good. Vidyanan?
Yeah, I just wanted to reflect on the way trance has mentioned here. So it's not just about entering into trance is a meditation. In fact, Baba Sahib in this verses clarified, because a person can enter into trance by various other means also.
Yeah.
We can see that in our society. But meditation is actually it goes hand in hand with the knowledge, and it also removal of your mental flatters.
Yeah. This interdependence of pradnya and dhyana is very important in the verse number 16, isn't it? It's not that the what is called pradnya can be just cultivated in isolation from dhyana, and the dhyana can be cultivated in isolation with pradnya. So the pradnya and the dhyana, sati and the dhyana, pradnya always go hand in hand, and they inform each other, they reinforce each other.
Right.
So just escaping into some kind of trance is not the Buddhist meditation.
That's true.
So very good to point it out, Vidyanan.
Verses number 24, 25, 26. They are Buddhanusati, Kayanusati, Dhammanusati. They are always set on Buddha, the Dhamma, and then body, and then Chittanusati.
Yeah, madam, I just remember one statement from one of the monk, that he was asked that where in the Buddha and his Dhamma the Vipassana is mentioned. So he has mentioned the same verses as you said.
We don't have to make big things about what's going on in the world in terms of meditation, where to find decent Buddha and Dhamma. That's not our concern. My concern is, how we can make the Buddha and his Dhamma speak for ourselves. It's a living monument of Baba Sahib Ambedkar. That's how MB Chitnis had put up. It's our duty as an Ambedkarite to explore into all the domains of Buddha and his Dhamma. We don't have to conform our book with the thought of others. We have to find the merit of the book ourselves. You see, there are so many things go on in the name of Buddhism. We are not going to look at all those things in the Buddha and his Dhamma. The Buddha and his Dhamma is a very comprehensive book, which is enough. If we follow it through, if we understand, if we study it, if we act in accordance with that, it's as there's so many places Baba Sahib Ambedkar has talked about the Nibbana, So if to me the Buddha and his Dhamma is an ultimate book for the Nibbana, isn't it?
Yes, true.
So most of the times we get caught up. I'm not an exception to that, to conform to the views of this Buddhist or that Buddhist, or we don't have to do that.
Yep.
Isn't it? Oh, where is Vipassana here? Where is this there? Where is that there? Well, that's not our concern. Our concern is
Correct.
we know that this book is comprehensive, conclusive enough for us. If we practice in this way, we are sure. Because Baba Ambedkar will not say something very lightly. He will not talk about Nibbana here if he didn't mean it. So I would say that have a firm faith in the Buddha and his Dhamma, in the words of the Buddha, in the words, the way Baba Ambedkar has presented it. We don't have to bring support for the Buddha and his Dhamma from outside. We are our own testimony to the Buddha and Dhamma. Our community should become the testimony, the living testimony to the Buddha and his Dhamma. You see what I'm trying to say, Rahul bhai?
Yes, yes.
Isn't it?
Very true.
Where
Yeah.
are the Four Noble Truths? Where are these?
This is
Where are that? You know,
correct.
you see, Baba Ambedkar was a genius. You know, there is no doubt about it. Sometimes people talk about, criticizing Baba Ambedkar. I say, okay, you go ahead. But, do you have even the a slight of the skills that Baba Ambedkar had? Even on the academic level, do you have a degree from an institute like Columbia or, from London School of Economics? Are we qualified to, Baba Sahib is a generous man. He will say, okay, criticize my book. But, if you look at it, the master of Tripitaka, the person who has been studying the Buddha Dhamma from the age of 16, effectively, in all the ways. And at the end of his life, he's writing a book, taking 6 years to write a book. Before that, in 40s, he was planning to write a book like this. Who is writing the preface of the book on his deathbed. So what I'm saying is, sometimes we just have to, have a faith in the man, in his understanding, isn't it? And practice the way he asks us to do. That's it. Forget everything. We don't have to confirm our book with this or that, or this teaching or that teaching. I was myself caught up in those kind of things, but now having realized that this book is an end in itself. We don't need to go beyond here and there. Out of interest, we can read this Buddha's, this Bhikshu's teaching, that will be okay, fine, no problem with that. But first of all, let's get grounded in something that has been handed over by such a man whose life has been a life of a bodhisattva, whose every thought, every action was devoted to the welfare of others. What more we need? Have a full faith and confidence in that man, in his thoughts. Of course, with an open mind, with a mind that examines. Do you agree with what I'm saying, Rahul? You don't have to agree with what I'm saying.
Yes, very true. Means this is the food scale actually. Which with that we can measure other things.
Yeah.
Other things cannot justify this. We can measure other things with this food scale.
Yeah.
There's no doubt for that. Yeah.
As we should have Shraddha, faith on Buddha and his Dhamma, likewise we should have full faith and Shraddha on Baba Sahib's teaching on the Buddha
And
and
it
his Dhamma.
works. It is not something abstract. It works. You try for yourself.
Yes,
It works.
we should try reading again and again this book.
I would recommend every day we should read some part of it. There is so much in it. It is not just a book. It has many layers. So if anybody has anything to say on this auspicious occasion, we will have another, actually 10 minutes. But if there is nothing more to talk about.
Mangesh Dada, I have.
Yeah, Vidyanand, please.
Yeah, I have 2 clarification. I need your help to understand. In verse number 8, the Baba Sahib and Ambedkar, in fact, gave a more emphasis on law, and that means he's trying to say the Dhammanusati perhaps may be more important than the.
Yes. Dhamma is important because from the Dhamma the Buddha emerges, no?
Yeah.
From the Dhamma the Sangha emerges.
Yeah. And the second clarification what I am seeking is related to the Kalyan Mitra. So if I imagine the life of Baba Sahib, perhaps there is no one who is at caliber of him. So he tries to borrow his guru, like he consider Mahatma Phule, Kabir and Buddha as his idols. So
Hmm.
in a way, as he considered the Kalyan Mitra to them, or because there is no one at his caliber. So sometimes it is hard to find a Kalyan Mitra. Can we consider Baba Sahib Ambedkar and his writings as our Kalyan Mitra?
Yes, because
So,
I think
or
that
is it is just a person what
yeah.
we need to find out?
See, anything that leads you to the highest is, doing kalyan to you. So the word kalyan is used in the very, the verses that Baba Buddha used. Adi kalyanang, majja kalyanang, anta kalyanang.
Hmm.
It's beauty, kalyan. Even it's not beautiful, or it's a very different meaning. Kalyan means something, leading to the higher and higher, isn't it? So when we are using the word kalyan, and Baba Sahib Ambedkar goes on in the Buddha and His Dhamma, the friendship with the beautiful. He translated it like this: the friendship with the beautiful. So we can say the friendship with the pure, the friendship with the Dhamma, the friendship even with the people who are maybe pure. We don't know, isn't it? But there can be always a difficulty of ending this human relationship if not guarded properly in terms of hierarchical arrangements. Like we have seen in the name of Guru, there are so many exploitations in the world, isn't it? So I would look at the friendship in the Buddhist context in both the levels, higher, so-called vertical and horizontal, isn't it? It cannot be just one way. It has to be in many ways. It should cover all the high depths and heights. To me, as you have put up, Baba Sahib Ambedkar is a Kalyan Mitra. He is somebody who can always lead you to the highest. He can always guide you to the higher things. He can always make sense to us in all the situations, isn't it? So how do we make Baba Sahib Ambedkar our beautiful friend? By engaging with his thoughts, right? How do we make Buddha our Kalyan Mitra? By engaging with his Dhamma, right?
Right.
Isn't it? And you see, this friendship cuts both ways. So if you are having these friends who are pursuing the similar path, it cuts. We impact them, they impact us. Friendship is never a one-way process. It's always a two-way process. If it's one-way process, then there is something very wrong. For example, in the mundane friendship, isn't it? A friendship implies that there is an exchange between the two human beings, right?
Yeah.
So in
Here,
the
church means what? What is that church? Always sit on church.
church means sangha. Take it as a sangha. Okay. There are some words which were not edited. It was published after Baba Sahib's death. It makes sense. Buddha, Sangha, and Dhamma. Isn't it? So you can cut it and write Sangha there. Not a problem. Okay.
So last verses teaches us to be alert, always awake and mindful on present tense and concentrate on the present age.
The first three are the three sarana. You always become mindful of the three sarana. Okay. The next second one is practice the mindfulness of body. Kaya Nupassana. Okay. Then you dwell in the compassion, Brahma Vihar. Okay. Then meditation, Sati Sampradnyan. So, it's everywhere you will see. It's not just Baba Ambedkar has talked about, the path in one way. If you look at the Buddha and His Dhamma, there are several ways to talk about the Buddha's Dhamma. The point is we should know all this holistically so that we know that the Dhamma can help us anytime, in any situation. So Vidya, is that clear? Vidya, is that clear to you about what we were discussing about noble friends?
Yes, I got it.
Okay.
How skillfully Baba Sahib has written this book, I always wonder.
Yes. So, all right then. Thank you so much for joining in today. And we will continue with the next part 2 in the next class. And maybe, we will go all the way through the rest of the part. So, thank you so much. Jai Bhim and Namo Buddhaya.
Jai Bhim.
Jai Bhim. Thank you, brother.